My name is Seamus Ford. I'm the Director of Community Engagement for Landmark, and you're attending the Landmark Difference Makers interview series. And if you're not familiar, our guest today is Maree McCabe, who has spent a career dedicated to supporting individuals living with dementia, as well as their families and friends as they navigate the unique challenges posed by this disease. As we live longer and longer, more and more of us are touched by the impact of dementia. And, Maree just completed her role as the CEO of Dementia Australia, where she led a passionate team of committed people providing expert support and advocating for positive change and really enhancing the quality of life for Australians who are living with dementia. And for her work in the field, Maree was appointed to the Order of Australia, which recognizes Australians who've demonstrated outstanding service and exceptional achievement. So we're really, really lucky to have her here with us today. Maree, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Seamus. It's so great to see everyone and some people that I know. So thank you for the opportunity. It really is an honor.
Oh, absolutely. Well, let's start with dementia. It encompasses a lot more than I think most of us are aware, and it's often misunderstood in the public. And if you would, could you just kind of create the how much dementia touches all of our lives, and the different expressions of it?
So right now, there are about 55 million people across the world living with dementia. And in Australia, we've got around 450,000 Australians living with dementia. And by 2054, that figure will double to well over 800,000. And it's the second leading cause of death in Australia after heart disease and the leading cause of death of women in Australia. And these figures are mirrored across the world. And it is the chronic disease of the 21st century. And one of the greatest risk factors is getting older. Now, it's not a normal part of aging, but it is more common as we age. And one of our greatest accomplishments is our increase in longevity, and it brings with it one of our greatest challenges, which is dementia. There are about 150 different types of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is the most common, and that's characterized by loss of memory, loss of short-term memory particularly. And the way that dementia manifests depends on the area of the brain that's affected. So with Alzheimer's disease, it's the hippocampus, and that's responsible for short-term memory. We're responsible for lots of areas of memory, but particularly short-term. But other forms of dementia, like dementia with Lewy bodies, frontotemporal dementia, vascular dementia, can show up in very different ways, and memory may not be something that's an issue. So what people may notice first is a change in mood. It might be a change in personality, but what is always there to have a diagnosis of dementia is a loss of function. And that it'll be something that the person was once very adept at doing that they can no longer do. So finding their way in a familiar area, it might be that they can no longer read music, or it might be that they struggle to organize themselves of a morning. They get up and they just can't they can't do the things that they normally would do once in a sequential manner without even thinking about it, that allows them to get on with their day. So that's a very broad brush overview, Seamus, of what dementia is. But the thing that I do want to say, it affects not just the person living with it, but it has a huge impact on families. And that's something that is really important in terms of providing support.
Well, that's certainly something that we want to really get into with you. But can you share a little bit about what drew you into this field in the first place?
My background started really in mental health, and I worked in mental health for many years. And in the days that I started my training as a psychiatric nurse, there was very little that was known about dementia. And it's something that fortunately has become more prominent in the area of research. So in my days working in mental health, I looked after people living with dementia. And then when I moved to aged care, in terms of my career, there were many people living with dementia, and it was something that I think that as an industry we've not managed as well as we possibly could. And the more that we know about it, the more that we've raised awareness about it, the better equipped we are now to deal with it. But my dad had dementia. He had dementia with Lewy bodies, so I had a very personal connection with it. And the way that it manifested with Dad was that the first thing we noticed with him was a change in personality, and he used to train racehorses and he would drive trucks, and he was a very, very fit and active man. And he went from doing that to doing nothing, to lying on the couch. So apathy was the first symptom that we noticed with Dad. And he went to the doctor. My mum took him to the doctor, and he was initially diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, then was diagnosed with depression, and then with dementia. And it took about 3.5 years for Dad to get a diagnosis of dementia, which is unfortunately how long it takes. And that's because many of the symptoms mimic other diseases. So given the symptom he had at the time, chronic fatigue was a, reasonable thing, his changes in mood, depression, but actually it was dementia. And he lived for another probably 10 years after his diagnosis. And certainly the impact on our family was, I wish I'd known then what I know now, because his experience and ours would have been a whole lot different.
Well, one of the things that I think is of interest to a lot of people that are attending this live is perhaps they are touched by dementia. My personal experience with it most recently was with my grandmother. She got into her 90s. She just primarily memory, but also some motor function. And, she was a very, very active person, and people marveled at how young she occurred, even though she was, well into her 80s. And that, rather gradually started to change. And I know for my family, one of the things that, really became an issue is the responsibility for care. And it was such an issue that, at certain points, people really couldn't even talk to each other over it. What are some of the ways that, you allude to, if you knew then what you know now, it would make a difference. But what are some examples of that?
Well, one of the examples, my mum cared for Dad, right, Seamus? And in fact, the way Mum never told us that Dad had dementia. And they lived in country Victoria. I would visit them every second weekend usually. And I was down there one weekend with my youngest daughter. And one of the things that Dad was always across was the grandchildren. And he and Maddie were sitting at the table, and Mum and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner, and we could hear them talking. And Dad said to Madeline, he said to Maddie, "Okay, Miss Maddie, what have you been up to?" She said, "Well, Pa," she said, "I've got a new job. I'm playing with a new basketball team, and I'm saving up to go to America." And he said, "Well, that's all well and good, but what about school?" And she said, "Pa, I haven't been to school in 3 years." And he looked at her and he said, "Good God, Madeline," he said, "does your mother know?" He said, "Because I can tell you right now, she won't be pleased when she finds out." Now, I thought he was joking. And I said to Mum, but then I realised, and he had a great sense of humour. And I said to Mum, "Is everything okay with Dad?" And she said, "Maree, he's losing it." And I said, "Well, what do you mean he's losing it?" She said, "He's losing it." And I started to notice things that were quite different for him. And he would say things that were really out of character. And he would swear. Now, Dad never swore at home. I mean, he was a farmer, right? He knew how to swear. That wasn't the thing, but he would never swear at home. And he started swearing at home regularly. And he got quite disorganized. He struggled he got quite paranoid. And every time Mum went out of the house, he'd lock the doors. So Mum would have keys planted all over the place. She'd go out to put the clothes on the line. Dad would lock the door. She'd go to the supermarket. He'd lock the door. And these were things that were just so out of character. And I rang her one evening and I said to her, you know, how are you? And she said, oh, well, she said, I'm doing well. I've only been locked out 4 times today. And I said, oh, Mum, I said, how's Dad? She said, Maree, you need never worry about your father. He will not die of natural causes. She had got to the point of the level of frustration of having to deal with some of these things. And she thought a lot of this was personal and that he was doing it to annoy her. And he wasn't doing it to annoy her. His brain was changing. Dementia is a disease of the brain. And the more that it killed off cells, the more his symptoms changed and became much more pronounced. And it was, if we had access to education about dementia and ways to deal with some of those symptoms, it would have been a lot easier for my mum. And she, of course, had her own health issues. Dad at this point was in his late 70s, and so was mum. And she had rheumatoid arthritis. Now, this is very common. You get older people that are, you know, they've got dementia being looked after by older people who have their own chronic health conditions. And of course, with some of the forms of dementia, sleep disturbance is really common. And if people can't get sleep, particularly carers, it's really difficult to function. And, you know, we know when we've had children how being sleep deprived is really difficult and it makes life difficult. And it really can be incredibly difficult for carers of people living with dementia when they're dealing with many of the challenges of, you know, and continence is another issue around dementia. And it's one of the things, environment is so important because an environment can either be enabling to somebody living with dementia because often they have perceptual disturbances, or it can contribute to their lack of ability and increased dependence. And I'll give you an example. In many modern homes, what we have are bathrooms that are all the same colour. So they're pristine, they're often white, and you see the toilet's white, the hand basin's white. And for a person living with dementia, they can't distinguish between the toilet and the hand basin. And carers will often say, look, I don't get it. You know, mum or dad goes into the bathroom, but wee's in the corner. Why don't they wee in the toilet? Well, they don't wee in the toilet because they can't actually see it. So a simple thing like a brightly coloured or a different coloured toilet seat can really enable their independence because they can see where the toilet is, they'll go to the toilet, but they won't if they can't see it. And that's something that, you know, many people don't understand about dementia.
Well, you know, the thing that really strikes me is you know, often the people that are being cared for are being cared for by people with their own chronic health conditions. I can just imagine the circumstances that can lead to for people. So one of the things that I do want to talk about, you recently completed as the CEO of Dementia Australia, and there's a wide range of ways that they serve people. Can you share that with us?
Mm. Yeah, the access into Dementia Australia, Seamus, is through our National Dementia Helpline, and that's 1-800-100-500, and that's available to everyone. And Dementia Australia was actually set up by carers about 40 years ago, and it was set up in every state and territory. It was actually a federated body, and about 6 years ago, it was my job to unify the organisation so that we had a more powerful voice for people living with dementia. And the work of Dementia Australia is about supporting people living with dementia, families and carers, and also the healthcare community. And the services that are available are the National Dementia Helpline is really information for anyone. And if anyone has concerns about their cognitive health, then that's the number to call. And we run counselling programs for people living with dementia and also carers and families. We also run education for people living with dementia, families, carers, and the healthcare community. We run social support groups, peer support groups where we have people living with dementia supporting other people living with dementia. We run carer groups where supporting carers. Those networks and the development of those are so key for people to be able to live well, to be able to share experiences, to be able to share the the things that work and don't work that they've tried that have gone really well or haven't gone well. And we have social groups like memory lane cafes, and we run a dementia-friendly communities program. And that program is really all about encouraging the community to become more dementia-friendly. And people set up groups, and key to that group are people living with dementia so that they can inform local councils and organisations about the things that make a difference for them as a community. And then the other thing that we really we do a lot of is lobbying government, and also we run advocacy. And our advocacy is always informed by people with the living experience of dementia. So we have a group called the Dementia Australia Advocates Advisory Committee, and that's all people living with dementia, and they inform the strategy of the organisation, the program development. They inform what we lobby government about, our budget preparation when we ask government for money for certain things. So it's a very active group, and one that we love working with, and has been such an extraordinary contribution to the work of Dementia Australia.
There's a question that just appeared in the chat about, and I think you shared a little bit about this with me before we started. The question is it hereditary, and do we have tests for it? And you were talking about all the different kinds of tests that we do have, yet
there are some forms of dementia that are hereditary. Fortunately, they are the rarer forms of dementia. So there's a type of Alzheimer's disease that is hereditary, and people develop that at a much earlier age. So they can be in their 30s when they develop that. We had a young woman who, the youngest client we have had, she was 21, and the day that she found out she was pregnant, she was diagnosed with dementia. And by the time her baby was born, 9 months later, she was unable to care for her baby. So fortunately, that's a very rare form of dementia. And there's also childhood dementia, where there are 2 genes that people have, and they're often unaware that they have them. And that's genetic and of course hereditary. So, but the other forms of dementia may be more common in families, but not necessarily hereditary.
I think a lot of people can relate to walking into a room and forgetting why you went in there, and then kind of trying to avoid the spiral of worrying about what's going to happen to you when you get older. How do, if somebody has a real concern like that, and I wonder if your father had any awareness of what was happening to him while it was happening. But those of us who are just encountering parts of the natural aging process, that question is often there, especially if we have family members. But what would you say to people that are dealing with those questions?
Well, there are changes that occur in our memory as we get older, and those changes are normal. So and the one about walking into a room is a really common one, Seamus. And in fact, I don't know anybody over the age of 50 that's not worried about their memory. But you walk into a room and you think, I know I came in here for something and I can't remember what it was. You retrace your steps and then you remember. But the time to be worried, so it might be your car keys, right? So you walk into a room to get your car keys, you've forgotten what you've walked in there for, but you come back and you remember. But the time to be worried is when you don't know what those car keys are for. So that's a really defining symptom. And there are people, and I think we need to take our cognitive health so much more seriously than we do. We get one brain, and we really need to look after it. And there are lots of things that we can do where research is becoming more compelling, that we can actually reduce our risk of developing dementia. Now, there's no guarantee, and we've had people that have lived lives that are pristine. They don't drink, they don't smoke, their weight is within great limits, they've exercised all of their life, they eat really well, and they still develop dementia. Right? So sometimes that happens, and we know that there are some modifiable risk factors. So the important one is diet. We recommend the Mediterranean diet. exercising our body and our brain is really important. The brain loves to learn. We know there are two things that increase brain volume. One is exercise, and the other one is education. So exercising our brain and social activity and engagement exercises our brain. And one that many people don't know about is hearing loss. So hearing loss is the easiest risk factor to modify. And if you have hearing loss, please get it checked, or you've got loved ones that have hearing loss, please encourage them to get that checked. That's really important. And then looking after our vascular health, healthy blood pressure, healthy, cholesterol, those things really make a difference.
You used the term brain volume. Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
What does that represent? Like, what is that? Like, what's the metric for brain volume?
It's really about the connections in the brain and do you know what I mean? The way that our brain is. And sometimes people say, look, I don't get it. My dad or mum did everything right, but they still developed dementia. And the thing is, they may have developed it much earlier had they not done all of the things that they did that made a difference to their brain health. So brain volume, it's kind of the size of the brain. Now the brain can only grow inside the skull, right? But it actually it's an important and brain volume is one of the things that's measured on PET scans when they look for things like Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. Yeah.
So it's kind of performance and also to some degree like a computer memory
Yeah.
capacity. Okay.
Yeah, very good. That's a great analogy.
So I want to just go back to your father and other people, that are going through the experience of it. Somebody that comes to mind right now is the actor Bruce Willis. His family's been generous in sharing about his journey through social media. People can follow it, and you know, virtually everybody knows who Bruce Willis is as an actor, and you can actually see in his last set of films he had very little dialogue. Like they didn't actually um, challenge him with dialogue. That's my interpretation, but it's noticeable. He might have had like 6 lines in a movie that he was supposed to be the star of, and in
Yeah.
retrospect, it looks like you know, he was still attempting to work while dealing with it. Or, we have a very famous coach in the U.S., a women's basketball coach named Pat Summitt, who passed away a number of years back, but she continued to coach after her early onset diagnosis. Can you share a little bit about what that experience is like for people to continue doing the things that they care about while experiencing this?
Yeah. It's different for everyone, Seamus. And I remember a one of our geriatricians he's one of our honorary medical advisors. He's one of our honorary medical advisors. And he said to me, he said, Maree, when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. And the experience is very different for people. But one of the things, for some people, they don't have any insight into these changes, and they think that what they're doing, which is completely out of character, is normal, that's what they've always done. And then there are other people that are aware of the changes and become quite frustrated by them, and they can become quite depressed by them, which is why it's so important when people get a diagnosis to get assistance and support early, because there's so much we can do to support people to live well. And there are other people that then, when they know that they've got a diagnosis, they're relieved because they've known that there are things that are different for them, but they haven't been able to work out what it is. And they'll go to the GP, and the GP might say, look, oh, it's menopause, or you've got a lot on your mind, it's anxiety, or, it's normal. But the person knows it's not normal. This is different for me. And one of the things that we've developed is an app called Brain Track, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But the experience for people, like with Dad, I think Dad had an awareness, but I think he got around it. Like his memory eventually started to change, and he could not remember names, and he got around that. All of the men he'd call mate, and all of the women he'd called love. So it kind of was a way that the brain looked after him by coming up with other ways of dealing with it. And that's what often happens in the different forms of dementia, where the brain there's a term called confabulation. And what that means is that the brain makes up stories. So if you say to somebody, what did you have for breakfast? And they say, look, I actually, I had bacon and eggs and toast and some tomato, when in fact they had cornflakes and milk, right? And the brain is it's a way that the brain is trying to cope with this loss of memory and loss of function. So the experience for people can be very, very different. And for some people, it's really distressing, and it's distressing for families. So, my advice is please get support early. There are lots of things that can be done. And there's a website at Dementia Australia. There's in other countries, there's a lot of services and support systems that are available for people.
There's two questions. So the first one is, what about PTSD and dementia? Will sufferers who have PTSD develop dementia more frequently or not?
It's a really great question. And the recent research about PTSD, and Professor Tony Bro is the researcher that's done work in this area. PTSD changes the structure of the brain, and making it more susceptible to diseases like dementia. Now, it's not just PTSD, but it's trauma of any sort. So repeated head injury, as in chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is another example of that changes the structure of the brain. And so, yes, it can make the person more vulnerable to dementia and increase the risk.
How can caregivers and family manage the guilt that comes from having to make tough choices on behalf of their loved ones, including moving them from home to a facility?
Yeah, that's a big one for families, Seamus, a really big one. And the more that they understand about dementia, sometimes that makes it easier to be able to make these decisions. And family members are often confronted with when their parents have said to them, promise me you will never put me in a home. And they make that promise. And then as the person deteriorates, it gets to a point where they can't be managed safely at home. And it is really important that families get support in terms of making these decisions. And often the best option for the person with dementia is to be in a home. And I know so many people that have had to move into care, and they've gotten better. Their symptoms, they've started to put on a bit of weight because they start to eat well again. They get, the nutrition that they need, particularly if they've been living on their own and have been struggling to manage. And they start to have people around them. They've got a community of people. So social isolation may have been a really big deal, but, that's what they've known, and that's what they've had to deal with. And because they're socially isolated, they can become depressed. They move into a residential care home. They've got people around them that are dealing with similar things. They're getting care from carers. And, it makes such a big difference for people when they've been struggling with those things. So people can actually improve when they go into care. And I think that's something, and families need to know that, there often comes a point where they just can't manage anymore. And it's particularly when continence is an issue, where people have urinary incontinence or fecal incontinence. Those things are really difficult for families to deal with. And, often people know that their parents would not want them dealing with that. And, there's some level where they get that. And I think when you have to make those decisions, if you're struggling with it, get support to make it, because it really does help.
One of the photos that has appeared in the slideshow here is people wearing virtual reality goggles. And it provokes a question for me, which is how are advancements in technology, particularly with AI, creating opportunities to support both people dealing with dementia as well as their family?
Oh, Seamus, this has been extraordinary. And we started working in this area when video game technology first came out. So 2013 was the first thing that we actually was our first foray into virtual reality. And we did this to develop programs for people caring for people living with dementia. And we worked on the theory that if we could actually simulate the experience of what it's like to have dementia, it would change people's attitudes, which would change their behavior, and it would change their practice. And I am delighted to say that that's exactly what happened. And as technology has advanced, so we used to have it in a room called the virtual, and we do a program called the virtual dementia experience and throw a scene up onto a big, to a big screen, and we, do it that way. It was two-dimensional. But then as technology's advanced and we've now got things like Oculus, and that's gone through various iterations, we've been able to put it on that, which is a mobile technology. We've now got that in, I think it's about 12 countries across the world that people are using that. And once people have the experience of what it's like to have dementia, it changes everything for them. And you can't get that through traditional learning, right? Experiential learning is so powerful. And so what we found is, and I'll share we had a young carer go through a program, and she rang the trainer the following 2 days later and said, I can't believe the difference this has made. She said, I shower Molly. I've showered her every day for the last 6 months, and every day she cries before she gets into the shower and she doesn't want to step in. And she said, I realized this morning I just needed to put her glasses on. And she put Molly's glasses on, and Molly went, oh, it's the shower. Stepped in, had a shower. She showers now every day with her glasses on. Her family are thrilled. Molly is delighted, and the carer knows herself as somebody who's made a difference. So it's not that and that's the great thing. And we know that from traditional learning, people have done research on this. A week after, people have forgotten half of what they've learned. Like 50% has gone. And then as time progresses, they forget something like 75%. With this learning, we've done studies, people retain 100% of the experience.
Mm.
So we've now got an avatar. We do work with that. We've developed apps, and Brain Track is one. And we have baselines for all sorts of things, for our blood pressure, our weight, our blood glucose, but we don't have a baseline for our cognitive health. And that's what Brain Track does. And it's a travel game, and you play the game, and then it tests things like facial recognition. There's a money calculation. There's recognizing your bags on the carousel, and they change the patterns. And then there's a directions one, which I fail all the time. That part of my brain has never worked. But it actually, people can now take this to their GP. So you play it every month, and you download the information that's completely confidential to you, take it to your GP and say, look, I've noticed in this domain, I've gone down. And the GP will go, okay, nothing to worry about, play it for another couple of months and come back. Or they go, okay, we need to do further testing. Now, we've had a number of people diagnosed early from using the app, and that's a fabulous outcome.
Well, there's just an enormous amount of creativity that you and I'm sure your team are clearly bringing, to the challenges here. Um, one of the things, this is the Landmark Difference Makers interview series, and one of the things that is a common thread in all of it is people's participation with Landmark. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how your participation in Landmark programs has empowered you, and in particular, this incredibly ambitious goal to shift the public conversation around dementia and creating a dementia-friendly society. I'm sure that's had its challenges.
Look, Seamus, none of this would have been possible without the work of Landmark. I am absolutely certain of that. I'm moved when I think about it, and it has provided such an extraordinary impetus and opportunity for me to do things that I never thought would ever be possible. And it's made a difference in so many areas of my life. And one of the differences that I think is fundamental is it gets me out of the way. to be able to be with people in a way that is just such a privilege. And in leading a team, like with this technology, we lead the world in this, which is remarkable. We were this tiny little charity when we started this, and we've grown exponentially. And it's about getting me out of the way to free people up to be the full self-expression that they are, to trust people, to, with the ideas that they have, give them the things that they need to bring these ideas to life, and to acknowledge and, just have the privilege of working with people and seeing them grow and develop. And that would not have been possible without this work. And I am always in a seminar. So there's, I need that. I need that to keep me, I don't know, I use the word clear, right? And present to the privileges that my life is. And, the humility to be humble about this. And I have relationships with people that would never have been possible without this education. I and I've registered so many people in the Landmark Forum. It is the greatest gift.
Well, one of the things that is really noteworthy, or I mean, striking to me is, is the conversation, the topic of dementia, particularly when it's affecting you personally, knowing that it has an end, that usually is the end of life. It's not an inspiring topic. It's not something that I'm sure people, really the fear that's associated with it and the resignation that's associated with it. And, what I really hear is you embodying and expressing a real passionate possibility that's, very much who you are. How might you articulate that?
Many people think about dementia as no future, and that is not the case. There are so many things that people can do to live well with dementia and continue to be an expression of who they are. And to be able to support people during a time like this, Seamus, is such an extraordinary privilege. And to be able to support carers of people living with dementia, and for them to get that this is not personal, the things that are happening in these relationships. But I think the thing that Landmark has given me is a way of speaking and sharing about this that kind of can shape a different reality for people and create a different reality, and they can create a different reality for themselves. I've just sent a team of people over to Poland to the Alzheimer's Disease International Conference over there, and with them is one of our advocates, and she lives with dementia, and she used to be a psychologist in her former life, and she developed dementia a number of years ago, and dementia progresses, and I just love that we can give people these opportunities, and that people know themselves as making a difference. Having dementia, they're able to contribute globally, right, to other countries and to other people living with dementia across the world. It's not the end of something, it's the beginning of something different, and we get to create a new reality with people.
Inspiring. Well, Maree, I cannot tell you what a privilege it is to be able to speak with you. And you know, I mentioned this in your introduction, but it's clear why you've been nominated to the Order of Australia. It's your life is so about service and so about a conversation, shifting a conversation that there's no doubt the impact that you've had, and it's just really a gift to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Seamus.
Maree, I can't thank you enough for being here today. It really, the the level of inspiration that you've created on a topic that, I think frankly before our conversation today, people might have found scary, something to avoid, is really remarkable. And your generosity and your tenacity and your just deep, deep compassion for people is really, really, really a privilege to be with. And I thank you.
Thank you, Seamus. It was awesome. It was a privilege and an honor